Palestinians assumed ownership of their education. Palestinians assumed ownership of their educational system in 1994, although we cannot say that they fully assumed ownership due to many factors. But that's when they started to have some autonomy about their educational system, and that was right after the Palestinian National Authority was established. So the Ministry of Education was formed in 1996 with a mission to provide education for all. However, it could not operate in full capacity due to the occupation and its resistance and many other challenges. So to give you some statistics, as of the academic year 2019-2020, there were about approximately 3,074 schools in Palestine. Out of these schools, we had about 400 private schools, and there were about 374 UNRWA schools. And that makes the public school sector in Palestine the largest provider, and that accounts for about 75% of schools. So as most of you are aware, COVID-19 has emerged in December 2019, and many things have changed since. So on March 4th, 2020, education was disrupted and the closure of schools was declared. Education had to shift to online at once. So schools closed in about 186 countries around the world. And that meant about 1.5 billion students were out of schools worldwide. And in Palestine, there were about 1.3 million students out of school. So the shift or the change in delivery of education occurred where feelings of fear, anxiety, and isolation were present in teachers, administrators, and learners, and with minimal readiness or preparation. So although online teaching, according to some studies and research, has some advantages, educators faced numerous hardships during their transition to virtual teaching under a pandemic. And in Palestine, the situation wasn't any better. As a matter of fact, it was worse due to many factors that have been already impacting the educational system and the educational sector in Palestine for years. And that includes political factors, cultural, socioeconomical, and educational factors. So based on some studies and research, demonstrates that online learning has given teachers the chance to teach in creative and innovative ways. However, many challenges persisted during online teaching under a pandemic in Palestine. Having faced many of these hardships firsthand as an educator in Palestine during COVID-19, while also working with other educators in the field, both in the public and the private sector, that has all inspired me to further research challenges to online teaching during COVID-19 in Palestine, and thus reflect on my own experience and my colleagues' lived experiences. And as I'm sure that many of these challenges can be common in other countries as well. Let's not forget that Palestine has a special case. It's under occupation, and teaching in Palestine occurs under abnormal circumstances for all teachers. Now, English language teachers, I can say that they face even harder challenges than those that I'm going to address or discuss shortly, due to them having to teach a foreign language. So they would have to learn the art of teaching and at the same time teaching a foreign language while at the same time mastering learning the language itself. So starting with the challenges. So the first challenge, educators started a new phase in education that relies heavily on technology. And that includes using a computer or an interactive whiteboard, video conferencing, Google Docs, blogging, polls, etc. For many teachers in Palestine, the situation of integrating technology in education meant for them utilizing mobile phones, social media, and cloud computing in delivering the lessons. So teachers made use of the social media that they use in their daily life, such as Facebook and WhatsApp, to create groups with their students. However, there were two major problems. Many educators, students, and families did not see the value of online learning and thus were not as involved as they should have been in it. And also, we had a very good number of educators who were still at a mediocre level in using technology. And they needed guidance and training to catch up with the tech-savvy educators, and thus they were not prepared to teach online. So we can say that teachers were not equally equipped with the needed knowledge and skills to adapt to teaching online. And that has created a digital gap, both among teachers themselves and also with learners. And that's because of the rapid learning by the younger generation of how to use new technologies. So as for learners' interaction and motivation, many studies state that social interaction and students staying in contact with their peers were psychologically essential during the COVID-19 crisis. However, during online teaching in Palestine, teachers were not able to form relationships with the students in the same way as before, nor could students interact with each other. This had the highest impact on young learners, to be honest. Teachers were less able to intervene in misunderstandings. Therefore, learning had to be driven by tasks that required a high level of self direction. And you can imagine the challenge of doing that with young learners. Dividing students into pairs or groups productively during online lessons has been a challenge for many teachers. And on top of that, supervising the learners while in groups was also very demanding for teachers. Well, another challenge that educators have faced in Palestine during online teaching has been collaborating with their team workers, and that includes lesson designing and lesson planning. And of course, according to research, collaborative planning can have many benefits as it allows teachers to brainstorm creative ideas, to see things from new perspectives, to work together, to foster student learning outcomes. Now, of course, during COVID-19, teachers were suddenly expected to plan together from afar, which they hadn't commonly done before. So it came sudden, they were not prepared, they were not ready. And although collaborative work was still taking place online, the quality of lessons was not as efficient as it would have been in person. And that's due to the lack of practice, lack of training, lack of knowledge of the appropriate strategies and tools that needed to be utilized by teachers in order to perform this in a good way. All right, so challenge number 4, teachers were under massive pressure due to the overload of work during the pandemic. Getting a handful of emails and notifications from administrators, parents, or students daily during virtual teaching was overwhelming. And honestly, teachers received many of those notifications on and off their work hours. And on top of that, assignments were mainly submitted online, and that was an announcement by the Ministry of Education after a few weeks of the online teaching. So teachers felt burdened. They felt stressed from the increasing job demands. And many teachers were unsure how or even whether they needed to grade the assignments virtually. So checking, grading, providing proper feedback online needed adequate training, guidance, and following up on the administration's behalf. Teachers were simply under massive pressures. And there were a few studies that show that teachers in Palestine called for a focus on pedagogy and teaching content rather than assigning grades on assignments during the pandemic. All right, so sorry everyone for that, and thank you for being patient. So I'll be talking, and thanks for Tamara for her help as well, my colleague. So I was talking about holding assessments during a pandemic in Palestine, and I was stating that no matter how hard teachers try to be creative in holding assessments, many often regress to the traditional ways of performing tests. And this originally may stem from the way teachers were taught in the past. So designing assessments, having the proper tools, rubrics, and criteria have been challenging and confusing for teachers during online teaching. The Ministry of Education announced that there would be no online assessments except for the examination of the 12th grade, which we call Tawjihi in Palestine. However, in private schools, this was still optional. And many schools chose to hold online assessments without properly preparing their teachers or providing them with a proper training. So from my experience and based on research, to ensure assessments are practical, the focus should be on the how and not on the what. So how do teachers deliver instructions that students can fully understand them, grasp the concept, and are able to apply them and thus learn for life? How do teachers ensure that students are connecting their learning and knowledge to real life examples? So the what is there, as you all know, the book, the content, the resources, etc. It's the how that educators need to focus on. And teachers struggled with virtual assessments during the pandemic due to the lack of knowledge and support. Now, among all the hardships that educators faced during online teaching under a pandemic, the most challenging was maintaining their well-being and keeping sane in a situation that was highly demanding, unstable, and unsafe. Many educators were under massive pressure to plan, organize, care, and teach under ambiguous situation while at the same time taking care of their own selves and their own families. Many educators were women who were also mothers during the pandemic, of course, and in normal times. So staying sane, enthusiastic, and motivated about teaching is a key factor that can foster quality learning outcomes. Research shows that there's a positive correlation between teachers' enthusiasm and learners' positive development. And teachers needed lots of nourishment, support, and encouragement, and definitely lots of appraisal and appreciation for what they were going through. All right, well, among all those challenges, there was an advantage. A favorable change that resulted from the unforeseen shift to online teaching was the flexibility in teachers' daily schedules, and also the minimal direct intervention of administration, not having to do yard supervision and other things. So teachers basically did not have to worry about problem solving or students falling down in the breaks, getting injured, or getting into fights. And there were also minimal weekly meetings of new regulations, instructions, or updates at many schools, which could have always been sent by email, according to teachers. Research shows that the pandemic has interrupted the staff meetings and that allowed for teachers and administrators to rethink and improve the process of the meetings. And also teachers had the flexibility to plan and grade at their own pace at home, which was an advantage among the whole chaotic situation. Now, just to talk a little bit about English language teachers in Palestine, those challenges were exacerbated for them, as I mentioned earlier, due to them having to master the art of teaching and at the same time having to master the language they're teaching and then teach it online, deliver it online. So according to research, EFL teachers in Palestine are unmotivated, they have low salaries, overload of work, they have large class sizes, they suffer from lack of resources, lack of time for planning, and lack of appreciation. They also deal with rigid regulations and restrictions, insufficient incentives, and encouragement. And while that all can be common for many teachers in Palestine, studies show that EFL teachers have been suffering from lack of adequate support, guidance, and training and professional development that they need in order to perform their job adequately. So just to start with, moving on from the challenges and thinking of them as opportunities for learning to enhance learning, because online learning can happen anytime due to any reason, and it can be sudden. And I think these challenges of the year and a half or 2 years of teaching under a pandemic online can be transformed into opportunities for learning. So the following recommendations can shed light on what could be done to move forward. So as for integrating technology, educators can design courses that maximize student learning, keeping in mind that many students will be using their mobile phones to access the lessons instead of laptops or tablets. Teachers can also use technologies that is accessible to students. They can mix online and offline technologies. They can plan for both synchronous and asynchronous learning. On the other hand, telecommunication companies can support providing internet to families, increasing bandwidth to teachers, and allowing students to browse educational websites for free. And the Ministry of Education can work towards providing laptops, headsets, phones, and tablets for teachers and students in need. Now, as for learners' interaction and motivation, educators need support to be able to supervise and support their students working in pairs or groups online in order to boost their interaction. So what the administration can do, they can use the experience of the more skilled teachers or train assistants to support groups or students online. It's very important that teachers allow time for conversations and to socialize during the online lessons to keep learners motivated. Most importantly, teachers need to maintain a good relationship and focus on the emotional well-being of the students. What can they do? They can plan warm-ups, build a connection, a comfortable trust-based environment, and that's very essential to igniting learning and establishing routine and structure. They can include elements of student choice in designing the tasks, and thus they can create opportunities for them to discuss what they're learning, and that would build students' interests and engagement. Well, for the challenge of collaborating with colleagues, that presents an opportunities for administrators in order to observe and analyze what has worked well to plan accordingly. So the administration team, they need to support and provide the needed training for teachers so that teachers can employ their pedagogical, methodological, and research skills in virtual collaborative lesson planning. And that needs a lot of effort on the administration team to prepare teachers. And then as for organization and time management, teachers need to focus on organization and time management skills to deal with the vast number of notifications and pressure. What they can do is they can prioritize tasks, they can allocate time wisely, set limits, and sticking to the schedule. Another recommendation would be for educators to stop lesson planning and maybe start unit planning and be flexible. I think it's better that teachers focus on what the teachers need to get to instead of what the teachers need to get through. And speaking of assessments or assessments necessary, so administrators need more insight and outsourcing to provide ample supply of methods, tools, and ideas of assessments. Teachers need to be flexible enough to adapt and customize their assessment resources. And it's very essential to ensure that learning is happening and connected to the psychological and emotional well-being of the students, and not only for the sake of grades as learning outcomes. So it's also important to recognize what actually needs assessment. So to ensure educators stay sane, administration and educational leaders can and they need to play a proactive role in providing emotional support to teachers. They can encourage, listen to, and value teachers' opinion. They can provide them with a constant feedback. They can listen to them. They need to be patient with them and understand their needs and the different backgrounds and perceptions. They can also provide resources for teachers to use and recognize the professional burden placed on them during a personally stressful time. When teachers are invested in and empowered, they tend to give their best, and thus that would raise learners' outcome, and that will positively reflect on learning quality, and consequently, that will have a positive impact on the whole educational society. Reflection is very important, and reflecting and learning on how to make the best of online learning is imperative to ensure learning is moving forward. So reflecting on the experience and learning from it in order to improve it allows for all those challenges to become opportunities. And I would like to conclude with a saying for the CEO of Coursera in 2020, Jeff Maggioncalda, that goes like this: as universities develop their digital competencies, what has started as a short-term response to a crisis will likely become an enduring digital transformation of higher education, and that could also apply to schools as well. So the education sector must be flexible and use this past crisis to learn how to be ready for future uncertainties. Because I have mentioned earlier, online education might be inevitable in the future due to many factors, and that especially in a country like Palestine, where education might get disrupted for a variety of reasons. I do believe that we can turn our stumbling blocks into stepping stones, and hopefully we can turn our hardships into learning opportunities to move forward in the future. Thank you so much for listening. Those are the references, and I'm ready for any questions if there are any.